Impala Platinum, the world's second largest platinum producer, recently dismissed 17,200 workers during an illegal strike that saw workers downing tools. We now take a look at what we can expect from future wage strikes in 2012. And joining us for this discussion is Kerwin Lebone from the South Africa Institution of Race Relations, Nicky Weimar from Nedbank, and Lesiba Seshoka from NUM as well. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining us at the desk this afternoon. Perhaps, Nicky, let's start off with you because it's been a fiery start to the 2012 year on the labour market front. But perhaps let's start off with yesterday's unemployment figures, because that's setting the context in which all of this is unravelling. And we saw an improvement of that jobless rate to 23.9%, but certainly still very extensive at this stage.
Oh, extremely high. And if you broke that down, it still stays alarming. You still have a very large proportion of South African youth being unemployed. Among them, the unemployment rate is much, much higher than that. So just that in itself suggests that the economy is failing to do its job, failing to provide for the vast majority of South Africans, and that is disturbing. And then the final bit that you also have to bear in mind when you look at yesterday's numbers is that there was a further increase in discouraged workers, and they're not counted as unemployed, and therefore the labour force shrinks, and therefore your unemployment rate looks better. But that's the discouraged workers are now amounting to over 2 million, and that is very upsetting.
When it comes to, I would just like to come in there, when it comes to what we have been seeing with the wage negotiations, particularly with inflation, and it seems to be a vicious cycle. We were talking about this in the newsroom, where you have these higher than inflation wage demands, and then those are made, and that feeds back into the economy because the producers then would probably pass it on to the consumer, and then it just continues year in and year out.
Yes, well, that certainly is the concern. It hasn't happened, though. The pass-through hasn't happened in this particular cycle, and there's a good reason for that. Is because we've been in a recession, really, for 2008, 2009, and then, of course, as we went into 2011, 10-11, we started to recover, but it was still very weak growth. Consequently, retailers didn't have pricing powers. Manufacturers didn't have pricing power. So the ability to pass those costs on have been really stumped to a large extent by the weak economy. But obviously, at some point, for companies, for retailers, as their margins come under pressure, once demand return, you will see this come back with a vengeance.
Yeah. Kerwin, let's throw something at you here, because we've got this strike action beginning for 2012 already, and in some instances, dire implications coming to the fore. What's the root of the problem? Are wage demands the primary cause of the wage or the strike chaos that we're seeing right now?
Well, each and every wage negotiations have been the cause of the strikes, but this year particularly, what COSATU has come with, it has come with through 3 new demands. The first demand, they want to do away with labour brokers. The second is that they want equal pay for temporary workers. And then the third demand is to do with Section 21 of the Labour Relations Act, which is really to do with also temporary workers, in that they should be added in when unions are recognized in the numbers. And that's the problem that the government, COSATU is going to have with government on the one hand and with business on the other, because business is not really happy with the banning of labour brokers, and also the ruling party has said that it's better to regulate them than to do away with them completely.
Yeah, Lesiba, I asked a question because I came across commentary that the strikes aren't about wage demands. They're an outlet for the national frustration of the previously disadvantaged poor, who feel that nearly 20 years down the line, 20 years later, they're still pawns of a system that's, servicing an embedded elite.
Well, of course, that is not far away from the truth. The reality of the matter is that if you look at the mining in Daba now, for many years they are discussing issues relating to how they can make more money. But the reality is that the poor workers are not getting anything out of it. If you look at the strike at Impala, it happened as a result of management's inconsistencies. They have agreed to a 10% wage increment over 2 years, and we were very happy. But they went ahead to say, as part of a retention strategy, they're giving a further 18% to the miners, excluding the rock drill operators and other categories. And we are saying that it cannot be right that the applied discrimination on the basis of who occupy what positions. We have already opposed the idea of the fact that the fat cats in the mining industry are taking home trillions of rands, but the poor are continuing to live poorer by each day.
What happens, I want to come in there, Lesiba, when it comes to one of the reports that we have been getting, you get the issue of intimidation, of some of the workers. And there has been news of this union that has come in that wasn't part of NUM, wasn't part of any of this negotiation, has come in, has sort of jumped onto the bandwagon and exacerbated issues. How do you deal with all of this?
Well, look, firstly, we think that Impala has been wrong by increasing unilaterally the amount of money earned by miners. But secondly, the issue of a rival union, there's no problem. We are amenable to the fact that each and every union can come on board. But you need to have 50+1 in terms of representation, in terms of percentages, to be able to have recognition and bargaining rights. And if you look at it, the fact of the matter is that you have 100 people that are allowed into the premises by Impala to disrupt other people. And the reality of the matter is that you have 5,000 rock drill operators that have been on strike, that have been dismissed, that you have left within the operations, then to intimidate other workers. And we simply said to Impala, you need to provide security to those that want to go to work. 13,000 of them have been intimidated not to go to work. There's no strike there. And if you look at that, it's a problem in the sense that that's why we've said that Impala is to blame. Because if the rock drill operators are away and the other 13,000 are at work, there'll be no production, because the center of production is the rock drill operators. And that's why our view is that Impala is much more happier to have the 17,000 gone rather than only 5,000 rock drill operators.
Having said that, the strike action seems to be taking on a new dimension, where we're looking at illegal strike action, Nicky, coming to the fore. Your sense of what's playing out here?
Well, that is disturbing, because obviously it makes it very difficult for a company to plan for it and to put contingencies in place and to hopefully float through the strike without too much disruption to production, to supply, to services, to the rest of the economy. But, on the point of wages and wage growth, I think the real poor in South Africa is represented by the unemployed. That is where we find the real poor in South Africa, and they're not represented by unions, and they do not get wage increases. But if you look at the Reserve Bank's numbers, and you look at the compensation of employees, and you look at that versus the growth rate in that versus inflation, you've had very good increases since 2008.
Is the inflation number, though, a reflection of the kind of costs that the employees are feeling on the ground?
For each individual it might be different, but if you look at what Stats SA does, is they do break it down by income category. So you have your lower income inflation rate applying to the lower income, middle income, high net worth individuals, because they have, obviously, as you've pointed out, different spending habits, and therefore different categories of goods will have different weightings. But I mean, the evidence is that 2008 we've had wage increases of over 13%, and inflation only rose by 9.9%, which was disturbing, but 9.9%. 2009, which was a year in which the economy shrunk by 1.5%, wages increased by 7.8% on average now across all industries, and inflation rose by 7.1%. So again, you had a real wage gain. We were one of the very few countries that in this recession had an actual real wage gain. In 2010, we saw wages increase by 8.6%, and inflation rose by only 4.3%. So that's a significant
Nicky, I
wage
want to
gain.
come in there. You seem to be really concerned with the unemployment numbers, and you're talking about the wage numbers. What would you like to see? What is the correlation there for you, and what would you like to see?
One wouldn't like to see that the unemployed are priced out of the market. You would like to see the labour market remaining flexible. You would like to see labour remaining an attractive option.
Lesiba, how would you respond to that?
Well, we, as a union, will never accept that kind of a thing. You see, the capitalism functions in a particular way. It's a matter of demand and supply. We're saying that if our skills are needed by the industry, then they must be prepared to pay for them. They must compensate them in a manner that is acceptable. It is totally ridiculous and unacceptable that when it comes to ordinary poor workers who are earning 5,000 or less, and they're given an increment of 13%, which is actually very low, then there's a whole outcry about a huge increment. But the reality of the matter is that when executives are taking home millions of rands, nobody makes a noise. So We are there as the unions, as a watchdog for those that are employed. Of course, we care about the unemployed. We want a difference to happen to the unemployed, but we'll never allow the industries to do as they wish.
I'm going to cut you off there, Kerwin. Solution to this, because it seems as though, you know, we're reaching a deadlock here. We've got the unemployed, but then we've got the argument that Lesiba is giving us. Where is the common ground here? What is the solution to moving forward?
Ever since the adoption of GEAR in 1996, there has been a problem between labor and business as to regards what direction we're taking. But I think there should be a balance struck between what Nicky has said. We need to employ a lot of young people. That's where the future instability of the country lies, if we don't get those young people to come and work. And if it means relaxing some of our labor laws, I think we should sacrifice to some extent. Mr. Lesiba, I know Mr. Seshoka is talking for his industry, but I'm talking on a broader level here that we should get our youth working in South Africa.
And if you're talking on that broader level to concentrate on the unemployed that Nicky had highlighted earlier, you'd have to look at the situation right now where economic growth is sitting and just how much of a pie there is to go around in terms of creating a working workforce.
And we're also not working in isolation. You must remember that we are part of the global economy now. We've just joined BRICS, and we have problems with the Greek economy, which is affecting the entire world. We've just come from a recession in 2009. You have to take all those factors into account if you're trying to solve the problem. And like I say, there should be a give and take on both sides of labor and business.
I'm going to throw this out there in terms of productivity. So a lot of research has shown that South Africa, I mean, if we look at other emerging economies, if we look at countries that we trade with, when it comes to productivity, we are not doing very well. It seems that our numbers are quite dismal there. And if we look at the number of stoppages, if we look at how many days are lost in every year, strikes included, and can be blamed for that partially, how do we then even compete on the global market with our, you know, when it comes to competitiveness, if we're not even able to, for the wages that we have, to be able to produce equally?
I think I need to say something around that. I think it's actually very problematic to conclude the conclusion that has been reached that, you know, productivity is low, the work stoppages are high. And because when we talk about competitiveness and we also talk about issues of our executives earning more money, usually the argument is that executives are getting more money because they are in demand, because they are doing very well. But if you look at the issues of productivity, they are not easily passed on to management. The issues of productivity are management's area. They need to ensure that their workforce is productive. But when you look at productivity, you also need to apply a good balanced scorecard and say, how do you minimize stoppages by ensuring that the work environment is safe? That is management's area. They have to ensure that they deliver on those aspects. Unfortunately, when all that happens, it's the poor workers that must be blamed. But when it comes to getting benefits, the poor workers are left there because of inflation. But the executives smile all the way to the bank, and there's no problem.
I know we're speaking very generic here, very broad strokes. I mean, this, you know, what Lesiba is highlighting, not applicable across the board and industry-wide. Nicky?
Yes, I mean, I think that what he's talking about to a large extent is the disparity in pay between sort of your average employee and the management and executive level. So that's that is within a company, you know, across levels of work. But from an economic perspective, you would generally want to reward productivity, and it doesn't matter what system you've got, whether it be socialist, whether it be capitalist. If you want to compete in the global markets, if you want to grow your economy, if you want to create wealth, you want to reward productivity. So from an economic perspective, if you reward productivity, which is unfortunately a discriminatory process, some work harder than others, therefore some have to receive more money than others, then you will move forward as an economy. There's little doubt about it. And I think that's part of the problem. And you see it extended into the civil service, where it now starts to affect the next generation. You take education, for example. There are many good teachers, but there are many teachers that are not up to the job. But they are all rewarded equally.
So what do you make of the stance that business has so far decided to take? We've had Implats firing 17,200 you know, miners that have pursued illegal strike action, and only to rehire them again. What position do they actually stand? Was that just posturing
Isn't
in the
this
first
the
place?
second time this has happened? I'm not too up to
Yeah.
up to beat with the story. They
it is the
fired,
first
rehired, and then they
It's actually the first time. I
First,
think it
just getting-
happened at Lonmin last year.
Yeah.
Oh, Lonman
Yeah.
was the other one where you had the same sort of situation.
I can see Lesiba's boiling under the collar and desperate
And
to just come in there.
And you know, I'm actually asking myself, where is this management expertise that people are talking about that must be highly rewarded? Because management is about managing people, ensuring that you don't have this kind of scenarios, ensuring that you don't create unhappiness, ensuring that people are made to deliver in terms of the target set. And this is management that is being rewarded. We are saying then we have incompetent management that's unable to ensure that people are happy, that is unable to ensure that there are sound industrial relations in the workplace. We as a union always say we are available 24 hours to ensure that everything goes well.
I want to bring Kerwin in here. A lot of this discussion we get when we're having strikes, when we have something like implots happening, and then it comes to the fore, and then we discuss it. How much discussion do you think should be happening with business, with labor, with the unions, with the actual workers who are on the ground on how we can move forward with this? Because this is something that we've talked about, global competitiveness. We've talked about unemployment rate and how that is really hurting our economy. How do we go forward and bring everybody to the table that we can discuss this, that we don't see this year in and year out?
I think it's imperative because what the strikes have done over the years is also affect not only industrial relations between workers and employers, but they have become a security problem as well. We have seen a lot of strikes in South Africa. Industrial action is characterized by violence and hooliganism and so on. And it puts a strain on resources that should be put to better use in the security cluster. So I think there should be a serious discussion between government, business and labor as well, to sit down and say we must map a way forward as to how should these things be conducted in a more cordial manner.
Well, that is the target. I mean, getting there, that's been the whole problem, right, Nicky?
We haven't got there. No, I think actually relations between business and labour have deteriorated. I mean, just based on the number of strikes we've had, the fact that the strikes tend to last longer and longer, that they tend to be associated with increased violence and unhappiness, and really it is a zero-sum game.
But isn't
the end of this, no one wins.
But isn't it more of an us and them? You know, there seems to be two.
Perhaps the problem here is ideology. I mean, if I listen with respect, from where my fellow panelist comes from, it's a very specific ideology. And business at the same time, on the other end, comes from a very specific ideology. And we tend to clash, and we don't tend to unite on what is the practical elements that will move us forward. And I think perhaps that is what we need to do. We need to both parties need to adopt a more pragmatic, more practical approach to dealing with business problems that involve both ownership, capital and labour. So hopefully we'll see more of that going forward, because unfortunately it is hurting our economy. We were growing in the first quarter of last year at a rate of over 4%. We had a series of strikes which slowed us all the way down to just over 1%. So the impact is brutally clear.
Is it possible that, Kerwin, I want to come to you. The mine industry does have a lot of issues, and when we talk about fatality, we talk about safety. So those are very specific, I think, to the mining industry. But broadly looking at it, Nicky was talking about ownership. How much would this change if it were that discussion between the employer and the employees, where the employee is not just, we can, some kind of offering, that there's some sense of ownership in whatever companies it is. It does seem like a very far-fetched idea, but you do see it that in some of the most successful companies around the world, there is a sense of ownership when it comes to the employees owning something in the company. How can we as South Africans in this economy be able to go that route maybe?
You are right there. BEE has been implemented in an incorrect manner over the years. Everyone has agreed very narrowly, benefiting only a few connected people. But there are positive signs. For instance, if you look at the KwaZulu-Natal sugar industry, the sugar industry came there, not waiting for government to come to them in terms of BEE and say, we will give our workers ownership of some of what they are doing. And that is what is happening. Partnerships between previous owners, broad-based economic empowerment in a fair and equitable manner is what needs to be done. And I think if they implement it correctly now, as they have not done in the past, I think that would be the right way to go.
Yeah. At risk, I give the last word to you, Lesiba. Let's look at, you know, the economic environment and your sense of it, because, I mean, what we've got right now in terms of the labour situation in South Africa, many say threatening the jobs picture in a big way, where that jobs picture growing is reliant on economic growth coming through. What's your view?
Well, look, I think we need economic growth, but we need to work together. I always argue that it's not going to be helpful pointing fingers at each other. Business needs labor. We need to sit around the table and find each other, more especially the solutions in BEE. For instance, if you look at the ESOPs, the employee ownership programs, they have changed the landscape dramatically. If you look at Kumba, we have seen a situation in which workers are actually hesitant to go on strike because they know we have got huge shares in this company. If we go on strike, the shares fall, and we've got a whole lot of problems. We are saying that the issue of ownership must be transformed and changed drastically if we are to have labor peace in South Africa.